Today, we are going to discuss happiness in Theravada Buddhism. Lord Gautama Buddha, who lived and taught in India during the 6th and 5th century before Christ, was born into a royal family as Prince Siddhartha. Now, as a royal prince, he enjoyed all the royal comforts and was prevented from witnessing any human suffering. But as a young adult, he did witness human suffering in the form of aging, sickness, and death. So he became disenchanted and wanted to find a way out of human suffering. When he was aged 29, he left home and became a homeless ascetic in order to find a way out of human suffering. As a homeless ascetic, he learned meditation from two of the foremost meditation teachers at that time, and he was able to develop advanced stages of meditation. Through those advanced stages of mental absorptions called jhanas, ascetic Siddhartha knew that he can be reborn in the celestial worlds called Brahma worlds and enjoy happiness and mental bliss for a very long time. But he also knew that even that spiritual happiness and mental bliss in the celestial worlds will come to an end and can be reborn in any other planes of existence. What he was looking for was eternal, permanent happiness. So he left those teachers, and for 6 years, he practiced severe austerity and self-mortification, looking for a path out of human suffering. And when he was aged 35, while meditating under a tree in a place called Bodh Gaya in India, he gained enlightenment as a Samma Sambuddha. Now, during the process of enlightenment, the Buddha realized the Four Noble Truths by his own effort with no assistance from a teacher. And the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha realized are the truth of universal suffering, both physical suffering and mental suffering, dukkha satcha. The truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya satcha. And the Buddha discovered that it is craving which is the cause of all suffering. The third truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering, nirodha satcha, and that is to gain enlightenment and the state of nibbana through the eradication of all forms of craving. And the fourth noble truth is the path leading to the cessation of suffering, Magga Sach, and that is the Buddhist path of liberation, the Noble Eightfold Path. And that consists of 8 factors: right view, Sammaditthi; right intention, Samma Sankappa; right speech, Samma Vacha; right action, Samma Kammanta; right livelihood, Samma Ajiva; right effort, Samma Vayama; right mindfulness, Samma Sati; and right concentration, Samma Samadhi. Now, what is happiness? Now, happiness is a positive emotion that we experienced when we are happy and pleased. And the happiness is accompanied by feelings of positive well-being, feeling of joy, pleasure, satisfaction, contentment, and fulfillment. Now, the Pali word for happiness is sukha. Sukha means happiness, pleasure, ease, joy, or bliss. And the Buddha has said, all living beings have a natural tendency to enjoy happiness and to reject any unhappiness. Now, in the Buddhist literature, the word sukha is also used to describe the quality of certain feelings that we feel. In a discourse called Dattabha Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's connected discourses. The Buddha described 3 types of feelings: pleasant feelings, Sukha Vedana; unpleasant feelings, Dukkha Vedana; and neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling, neutral feelings, Adukkhama Sukha Vedana. Now, when we receive external sense objects through our internal sense doors of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the body, if those sense objects are pleasant and attractive, we have a pleasant feeling. If those sense objects are unpleasant or disagreeable, then we have an unpleasant feeling. If those sense objects are neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, then we experience a neutral feeling. Now, whatever happiness that we gain from pleasant feelings that come from the external sense objects is transient, impermanent, and short-lived. So when those pleasant feelings cease, then that can lead to unhappiness and also to develop desire and craving to have even more sensual happiness. In a discourse called Mahasatipatthana Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's middle-length discourses. The Buddha described 2 types of happiness. The first type is called worldly happiness, Samisa Sukha. And that is the sensual happiness that we experience through our internal sense doors. And the second type of happiness is unworldly happiness, which the Buddha named Niramisa Sukha. And that is the happiness that one receives and experiences during meditation. In another discourse called Niramisa Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha described two levels of unworldly spiritual happiness. And the first type of spiritual happiness is the happiness that one experiences during meditation in what are called deep mental absorptions or jhana. And the second type of spiritual happiness, the Buddhists called still greater unworldly happiness. And that is the happiness that an enlightened arahant feels. Now, with regard to worldly happiness, in a discourse called Punnakirya Vattu Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's numerical discourses. The Buddha described three meritorious actions that can lead to worldly happiness, happiness in this life as well as in future lives. And those three meritorious actions are giving or dana, moral behavior, sila, and meditation, bhavana. And in another discourse called Anana Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha described four types of happiness that a householder can enjoy. And the first type of happiness is Atti Sukha, and that is the happiness that one experiences when one earns one's wealth through justifiable and rightful means. The second type of happiness is Bhoga Sukha, and that is the happiness that one enjoys when one is enjoying the wealth that one has earned, spending it on oneself, one's family, friends, and relatives, and also in performing meritorious deeds. The third type of happiness is Anana Sukha, that is the happiness that one feels when one is free from any debts to anyone else. And the fourth type of happiness is Anavajja Sukha, and that is the happiness that one feels when one is blameless in one's life because one has not committed any unwholesome physical, verbal, or mental actions. Now, in a discourse called Vaggapaccya Sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya, at the request of a householder called Digajanu, the Buddha described four accomplishments that can lead to worldly happiness in this life as well as future lives. And the first is accomplishment of effort in earning one's livelihood through rightful means. Uttana Sampada. And the second is accomplishment of protection, Arakka Sampada, and that is happiness in protecting one's wealth and assets that one has earned through rightful means. And the third factor is having good friends, Kalyana Mittata. And the fourth factor is leading a balanced livelihood, samajivikata, that is living within one's means. Now, when one considers different discourses that we have discussed, as well as in other discourses in the Buddhist scriptures, we can identify three kinds of happiness within the Buddha's teaching. And that is sensual happiness, mundane spiritual happiness, and supramundane spiritual happiness. Now, sensual happiness, of course, is happiness that we gain through the pleasant sensations from the sense objects that we received through our five sense doors. And that is pleasant visual objects through the eyes, pleasant sounds through the ears, pleasant smells through the nose, pleasant taste through the tongue, and pleasant touch sensations through the body. And if those sense objects are pleasant, charming, agreeable, and enticing, we received pleasant sensations that lead to sensual happiness. But the danger of this sensual happiness is there is a tendency to develop desire and craving to have even more pleasant sensations. And in describing the second noble truth, that is the cause of all suffering, the Buddha describes three types of craving. And one of those three types of craving is craving for sensual pleasures, kama tanha. Now, one develops desire and craving to have sensual pleasures because of one's ignorance of the true characteristics of all the experiences. The Buddha has said that every experience is impermanent, anicca, leads to suffering, dukkha, and has no substantiality, anatta. But due to our ignorance, we consider what is impermanent as permanent, what is painful as pleasurable, what is not self as self, and what is unattractive as attractive. Now, no sensual happiness can be satisfied because the sense objects that provides sensual happiness for us are all transient, impermanent, and short-lived. So when the pleasant sensations cease, that naturally leads to dissatisfaction and suffering. And that can then lead to unquenchable craving for even more sensual happiness. And craving, of course, can lead to clinging, upadana. And according to the conditioning process, dependent origination, the paticca samuppada that Buddha has described, clinging can lead to existence, bhava. Bhava can lead to jati, rebirth. And rebirth can lead to all types of suffering, dukkha. Now, craving for sensual pleasures can bring suffering due to the enormous effort that one needs to make in order to obtain sensual pleasures. And if one cannot get sensual pleasures that one is looking for, one will be prepared to resort to any wrong and unwholesome means to get that sensual pleasures. And if there is anyone or anything that is seen as an obstacle, one can do anything to remove that obstacle. And the Buddha has said, for most of the unwholesome actions, such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and drugs and alcohol use, sensual pleasure is the primary reason in most of the situations. And Buddha has said there is nothing wrong in enjoying sensual pleasures. But if one can enjoy them without developing any lust, desire, or craving for them. Now, when one meditates, there are certain mental defilements that can hinder our meditation process, and they are called mental hindrances. And desire for sensual pleasure, kama chanda, is one of those 5 mental hindrances that can negatively affect our meditation process. And because of the unwholesome and unskillful actions that we are prepared to take in order to obtain our sensual pleasures, that can also distance us from the Buddhist path of liberation. Now, the second type of happiness is mundane spiritual happiness. And this is the happiness that one enjoys during meditation through the development of the mind. In the Buddhist literature, there are 40 meditation objects that are suitable for concentration meditation. When someone meditates on one of those meditation objects, there is concentration of the mind. And as the concentration deepens, those 5 mental hindrances, that is sensual desire, kama chanda, ill will, vyapada, sloth and torpor, thinamidda, restlessness and remorse, uddacha kukkucha, and skeptical doubt, vichikiccha, get gradually suppressed. And as the mental hindrances get suppressed, 5 positive mental factors called jhana factors developed. And the 5 jhana factors are applied thought, vitakka, sustained thought, vichara, rapture or joy, piti, mental bliss or happiness, sukha, and one-pointedness of the mind, ekaggata. And as the concentration of the mind deepens, what are called deep mental absorptions or jhanas can develop. And the Buddha has described 8 such jhanas. 4 fine material jhanas called rupavatara jhanas, and 4 formless deep absorptions called arupavatara jhanas. Now, this spiritual happiness that one gains through meditation is sublime, pure, and more serene than sensual happiness. But like sensual happiness, this happiness is also conditioned and impermanent and temporary. So when the conditions that led to its development cease to exist, then this spiritual happiness will also cease to exist. And also, during this stage of spiritual happiness, the mental defilements of the mind get temporarily suppressed, but they are not completely eradicated. And Buddha has said through the development of these 8 deep absorptions, jhanas, one can be reborn in one of the celestial worlds called Brahma worlds and enjoy spiritual happiness and mental bliss for very long periods of time. But even those celestial beings in the Brahma worlds, they are still within the cycle of birth and death, samsara, and they can be reborn in any of the other planes of existence and are subject to suffering. The third type of happiness is supramundane spiritual happiness. And this is the happiness that is enjoyed by an enlightened person, an arahant, whose mind is free from all mental defilements. And that is also the nibbanic happiness. And that is the supramundane state of ultimate happiness. And this supramundane nibbanic happiness is beyond all forms of conceptual thinking. And it cannot be properly described or explained in any worldly conventional language. And this is attained through the practice of insight meditation, vipassana bhavana, to gain an understanding of the true reality of all the conditioned phenomena that exist in the world. And this nibbanic happiness one can gain during this life itself, here and now. So that is not a happiness that we can gain only after one's death. Now, while both the sensual and mundane spiritual happiness are conditions due to other conditions and causes, this nibbanic happiness is unconditioned. And it is accompanied by peace, equanimity, and deep contentedness. In the Niramisa Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha described the difference between mundane spiritual happiness and supramundane spiritual happiness. And the Buddha said, supramundane happiness is when one destroys, eradicates all the mental defilements, such as fermentations. And then when one reviews one's mind, which is liberated from all mental defilements, including greed, hatred, and delusion, and that is the supramundane spiritual happiness. And the fermentations are mental defilements that Buddha has described, which are of 4 types: sensual desire, kamasava; desire for continued existence, bhavasava; wrong views, ditthasava; and ignorance, avijjasava. Now, the supra-mundane happiness, that is the natural happiness of an enlightened arahant. And as we said, it is unconditioned and it is permanent. And the mind that enjoys supramundane happiness is free from all the mental defilements, including the three unwholesome roots. So the aim of a disciple of the Buddha should be not to indulge in transient and temporary sensual pleasures or mundane spiritual happiness, but to cultivate the Buddhist path of liberation from suffering and attain the ultimate supra-mundane happiness of Nibbana. Thank you very much.